everyone. So the movie we're going to filmalyze today is Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve. We're going to analyze it and touch on all the little things that might otherwise go unnoticed when analyzing a film of this scale. We'll touch on the directing, the cinematography, the blocking, the lighting, the sound design, the visual effects, the makeup, the costume design, and many other things as we go on this journey. So for me, Dune Part 2 isn't just a sequel, it's like a continuation of a cinematic thesis. I don't feel like this film is directed as an action spectacle or a franchise installment. I feel like Denis directs it as a slow-moving historical inevitability, where every technical choice, from lens selection to blocking, reinforces one idea. Power doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives gradually, and once it's here, it cannot be undone. This analysis is going to focus on how Dune Part 2 uses cinematography, performance, sound, and visual language to transform Paul Atreides from a reluctant survivor into a myth that terrifies even himself. So we're going to sort out the beginning of the movie here with Paul among the Fremen, the guerrilla warfare. And with this, I think they're introducing a new kind of action language. Villeneuve opens the film by immediately redefining how action works on Arrakis. Unlike Dune Part 1's operatic battles, these sequences are more fragmented, observational, a little bit stripped of spectacle in this part of the film. So let's talk about the directing and the blocking. So when you look at some of the shots here, Paul, he's rarely in the frame, like center frame. He appears, but as he's among the Fremen, he's partially obscured, sometimes by people, sometimes by things like rocks. In the wide shots, you see he's dwarfed by the landscape sometimes and makes him smaller. Or he's framed just alongside other people, if not ever, you don't ever see him above them. And then in other shots, he's framed alongside other Fremen, but never above them, kind of foreshadowing a little bit. This visual humility reinforces that Paul has not yet become the myth. And the Fremen, they consistently occupy these really grounded, stable positions in the frame, while Paul, he's more shifty and reacting to what's going on around him or slightly behind the group's moving, really just trying to blend in. I think this creates sort of a subconscious hierarchy. Paul, he's present, but he's not yet accepted into the group. The cinematographer of this film is Greg Fraser. I think he leans heavily into long lenses compressing the distance. There's a lot of dust-filled atmospheres or, dune-filled atmospheres since it's a desert, right? And there's really minimal camera movement in this part of the film as it's kind of unfolding. No visual endorsement at all of Paul Atreides becoming what he becomes. The camera behaves like a witness more so than a participant in this part of the film. The camera height stays mostly neutral or, slightly elevated, which prevents Paul from ever feeling dominant in this part of the movie. There are no heroic low-angle shots of him that have him, standing above the Fremen people. And I think Villeneuve understands that respect must be earned visually and not really announced through the dialogue with a person who's really coming to be a savior of a people. The sound design. So I think here, when you think about the sound design, you got to really pay attention to what's not there more than to what is there. So what's missing? We got to notice what's missing. There's no heroic score in this part of the film, no emphasized impacts, but instead we hear the wind, we hear the sand, we hear the breathing inside the still suits. We hear all of that stuff and really reinforces the environment that they're actually walking around in and what it's like as compared to what we might know to be normal. I think all these things, it keeps the violence matter of fact, aligning us as the viewer with the Fremen's efficiency, rather than the cinematic glory of them, dominating their opposers. In this part of the movie with the early Fremen stuff, Villeneuve does something very deliberate with Paul's physical presence. Paul is almost never the visual center of the frame. This is not accidental. From a directing standpoint, Villeneuve is denying Paul the cinematic authority. Even when Paul speaks, the camera often holds back, observational rather than supportive. The next scene we'll look at is Fade Rotha's arena scene. So there's a lot of things happening in this scene. And we're going to talk about the character through the production design and the lighting first. So this scene here is one of the most overtly stylized scenes in the film, and it's doing immense narrative work. When talking about the lighting, the high contrast, the near monochrome lighting strips away the warmth and the depth of the shots. This isn't realism, it's ideology. The light flattens the skin tones and textures, creating a sense of like artificiality, performance. It's an arena, so, and kind of a ritualized violence. So much so that when they're coming out of the tunnel and they're transitioning to the arena, you kind of see it go from having a bit of warmth and color to being completely monochrome, black and white. Okay, now talking about the production design, the arena is very symmetrical. It's clean, it's brutalist. It's very unlike Arrakis, which feels ancient and weathered and organic. This environment feels engineered. I think that tells us a whole lot about Fade Rauta. How he is the product of control, not the product of survival like the Furman people. The performances, Austin Butler, I think he plays this role really well. So Austin Butler's performance is tightly choreographed. It's not emotional. I think Villeneuve directs him as a performer and not as a fighter. And every moment, every movement feels rehearsed because in this world, violence is for spectacle. So scene 3, the next scene that we're going to talk about here is the Water of Life scene. So, I kind of look at this as like cinema as a ritual. This is one of the most formally daring scenes Villeneuve has directed in this movie. I think a couple of reasons. When you talk about the visual design, I think the Water of Life sequence abandons realism for a lot of reasons. It has this abstract compositions to it, floating camera movement, and non-linear editing, with the flashbacks and the face dissolves into darkness and the time collapses and things like that. And then we're talking about the editing, the way it's cut. The cut to sequence, it kind of feels disconnected and kind of circular even, where you're trying to come to full circle moments in these things and realization of what's happening and what will happen in different parts of time. I think this mirrors Paul's experience of seeing multiple futures at once. The Sound of Music, well, Hans Zimmer is the composer on here, and his score becomes very vocal and choral and almost religious feeling in this part of the film as everything's unfolding. I think the sound design overwhelms clarity. This is not meant to be understood intellectually, but felt spiritually. When some of those things happen, you can kind of really feel it in your bones, especially if you saw it in the movie theater. I feel like the directional intent of this scene, Villeneuve is showing us that power is not empowering, it is disorienting, it's violent, it's invasive. Paul does not gain clarity here. He really loses his innocence. He goes from being this character who, he says it earlier in the film, like, I'm not here to lead, I'm just trying to learn your ways. But now he's lost that innocence. He understands that the only way forward is to take control and to become this sort of deity to these people, so to speak. Scene 4. The next one we'll talk about here is the scene between Paul and Chani, where we kind of see that they're falling for each other, or that she is reciprocating his feelings, and then you have this moment of human intimacy that creates a resistance. Zendaya's Chani is great, and she really in these moments is the emotional counterweight to the entire film. As the film goes, she's always the one fighting against the idea that Paul might be the next coming of this prophecy. Throughout the film, as everyone is kind of starting to fall into line and really believe in the prophecy, and Paul is this outside person who's coming to save them, Chani is the one who really continues to give the pushback throughout the duration of the film. And a lot of that in this scene is given off through the blocking and the framing. So when you see Paul and Chani, they're often frames in like two tight shots where they're right next to each other and really close, with shallow depth of field and really isolated from the world around them. So it's like they're really getting an opportunity to know each other without actually having to deal with what's actually happening in the world around them. They spend a good bit of time just sitting, the two of them, talking and really getting to know each other. When you talk about the costume and the production design, Chani's wardrobe here remains very practical. I think it's unadorned and grounded. And Paul's starts to evolve. It becomes a little more darker, a little bit more structured, more symbolic. His eyes change color. He's now been ingratiated into the Furman life. He's fought in some battles. He's been through the wars. So now he's really ready to become one of them. So thinking about the performance direction, Chani isn't afraid of Paul. She's afraid for Paul. And I think Zendaya plays this through stillness rather than through confrontation. Her skepticism becomes the audience's moral anchor as Paul sort of starts to become the chosen one. When they're going south, the framing becomes the ideology. The moment when Paul fully embraces his role, the film's visual language changes. There's a shift in the cinematography even. So now Paul, we see him and he's more centered. He's more framed in the middle. He's shot from those low heroic angles now a lot more. He's placed into the open skies and how he's to be perceived. Once he's been placed against the sky, now the desert no longer swallows him whole in the frames. He's now, kind of swallowing up the frame himself. So thinking about the lighting here, the lighting in this scene is very high contrast. The lighting introduces harsher shadows here, where Paul's face becomes more sculptural, and less human. I think that his humanity in this part of the film is kind of being stripped away. And I think it's a directional choice. I think Villeneuve does something crucial here. He makes Paul visually impressive. Like, when you see him, he looks like a person that he could be, I believe. He could be that. He could be what everybody's telling me that he is, except for Chani, of course. This prevents the audience, I think, from fully celebrating his rise. I think it gives the audience kind of the moments where it's like, maybe he shouldn't be trying to do this. Maybe he should be just trying to be one of the people. Maybe he shouldn't be trying to lead. We're going to talk about the final confrontation scene next, the fight between Paul and Fade Rauta. So I think when you look at this scene here, it's violent, but there's not really much triumph to it. It's violence without triumph. The climax, it avoids traditional catharsis. The editing and the pacing, the fight, I think, editing and pacing wise, it's very efficient. It's still brutal. It's emotionally cold. It's two people just trying to kill each other. And I think Villeneuve denies the audience really the slow motion, the musical release, or the heroic framing that you might see in some fight scenes in films where, the hero is going to come out on top. So, and I think the sound design, the steel on steel and the sharp edge, you can hear it. And it really is satisfying because it gives a sense of realism to a fight that, somebody's going to die. It's a fight to the death, and you know that. And so the sound design, the steel on steel is sharp and it's ugly and you can hear it. It's wonderful. I think as you're watching it and you hear the metal clinking, somebody's going to die. And every time somebody gets stabbed, you're like, okay, who's going to be? We know who it's going to be, the hero's going to win. But I think the silence afterward is deafening. All the people there, the victory feels like a loss because it is. It's a loss for the Harkonnens. All of them, they're dying. The current king is now being forced to kneel before Paul. And you can feel it. You can see it from all of their people. They lost, and they hate that they lost. And there's nothing that they can do about it. So the scene at the end of the fight where Paul demands that the emperor kneel before him and he stomps his foot. I mean, the power in that stomp is so amazing. I think for me watching it in theaters, I was like, oh, yeah, this is some real shit that's happening right now. So I think the victory for the Harkonnens and certainly for the ruling family, it feels much like a loss. But to the Furman people, it feels like a win. As soon as they see that Paul's victorious, everybody starts to celebrate. So Now they feel like it's coming true. They feel like the prophecy is now coming true. To wrap this up here, kind of the ending of the film. So we'll call it the cost of destiny. Paul agrees to marry the princess. Which obviously Chani doesn't feel really good about that. We have a world reshaped, a world that's going to be reshaped, and that's what the promise is. That's what the promise of the prophecy is. To free the Furman people and give them paradise on their planet. So, and I think in the final images, we really get to see, and it emphasizes the scale, where you see the massive crowds, and then we start to see the start of the planetary consequences and the political inevitability of what's coming next. And then Chani leaves, so Chani's absence from Paul's side at the end of the film is probably the most devastating image. As she's leaving and she's by herself, and Paul had said to her not long before that, like, I will love you as long as I breathe. So, very, very devastating to see her leave, and we gotta see what happens next. But I think a final thematic note here is Villeneuve, I think, closes the film on a warning and not a promise. Paul Atreides has won, but the universe is gonna have to pay for it, and that's what we see with the oncoming war that's about to happen. So yeah, I think Dune Part Two was never really about Paul becoming a hero. It's more about realizing that heroes are often the most dangerous thing in a society can create. I think Denis Villeneuve directs the story not with excitement but with dread, and that's really part of what makes it an unforgettable, amazing film.